Okay,
We're talking
cool.
about your son's
We're
nap
talking about
time.
my son. He's approaching nap time. He may be screaming in the background in the beginning of the episode. I'll try and mute myself if need be. And to those who are watching us live, now you know what happens in the Justin household around 12:45 p.m. every day, if my son is home. Another episode of Run With It. This is behind the scenes here with Ryan Frederick. He is the author of the Founder's Manual. We're going to be talking about a business idea to help facilitate borrowing. This is going to be the unedited version of the podcast. If you would like to listen to the polished version where you don't have to hear flubs like "Would you like to see?" then download it on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, wherever you listen to your podcast. It'll be out in a couple weeks. Okay, you guys ready to get started?
Ready to go.
Let's do it.
I got to hit recording on Zencastr first.
Oh, that's important.
That is an important step. Hey there, everybody. You are listening to Run With It, the podcast that brings you new business ideas from proven founders. Ethan, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing pretty good. I have a lot of stuff around my house that I was cleaning today. You know, the New Year's coming around, and just trying to figure out whether I should get rid of some of it or I don't know. Just got a bunch of crap.
Oh man, is that that's just teeing things up right here for Ryan Frederick. He's bringing us the idea. That's not even subtle, but I like it. I appreciate it. It's
The
good.
thing is that it's true.
It is true.
It's true that I'm cleaning my house today.
Actually, that's true for
that
us
I'm
too.
wondering what to do with my stuff. You know, Go ahead.
We were pulling out all of Rowan's old toys and books that aren't applying for his age right now too. So yeah, I guess it's a good time of year. But that brings up Ryan Frederick's business idea that he is going to be sharing with us: the problem of people not having an easy way to track goods that they are looking to borrow or lend to neighbors and friends, etc. Ryan Frederick is the author of the Founder's Manual. It's a new book out right now, and he's a proven founder with 20 years experience in multiple industries. Ryan, glad to have you on the show.
Guys, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So how did you come up? Tell us what like triggered this idea for you. Is there a moment? Was there a story behind that?
Yeah, there is. Recently, like within the last 2 weeks, I was talking to a friend of mine who's starting a new company, and we're helping him with the product, and part of a tangent to this new company and this new product, is the borrowing of things. And he was, telling me that he, realized that he went to, find a saw to do something, and he realized that he didn't have the saw, and he had lent it to a neighbor in a city that in a state that he doesn't even live in anymore. And so now for him to get the saw back, right, they'd have to ship it, and there'd be shipping involved, et cetera. And so, and then we talked for a few minutes about, how borrowing things almost always means the lender is never going to see it again, and that the borrower then almost always ends up with like remorse and guilt right down the road, where they realize that, oh, I've still got Joe's saw, I've still got Susie's sewing machine, right? And so I actually thought about that, and I was like, there's a borrowing economy, but no one's ever captured the borrowing economy in some sort of an app and in some sort of experience and platform. Because if you think about, the borrowing economy, if I lend you, Ethan, a book so that you can read it, there's monetary value to that, right? Because now you don't have to go pay the 20 or 30 or whatever, dollars it is for the book. You can get it from me for free.
And then I don't have to pay royalties to Ryan Frederick for the book that he wrote. So that's great.
Right, exactly. So Well, then what is it worth? Is it worth $1 for you, right, to pay me through some, through an app so that, you can borrow the book and save $29, right? And so I don't know. I think there's potentially an economy and an underlying flow of goods and monies around the just, natural sort of process of people borrowing things from each other.
Yeah, I really love this idea, and part of what I love about it is that it helps reinvigorate some things that I've maybe grown a little bit cynical about. I'm passionate about keeping the planet, pure and clean, and anti-consumerism and things like that. But sometimes these things are so hard to manage, right? That we just go ahead and say, okay, you know what, you've got to have your own, I've got to have my own, and they've got to have their own, even though we're all going to only use it, one day out of the year, But I've had situations, I used to be a very serious musician, gigging musician. So I had multiple keyboards that I used to bring around and lug around and play, and I would tour. And I transitioned my life and I became a PhD student studying biology. And I still had them sitting around. And I ended up, trying to sell one of these really cool keyboards, but I just didn't use it. And I said, I'm just going to give it to my buddy, and I think he could use it more than I would. And to this day, I'm so happy that he's been using it and I haven't, because he's made such awesome music on it. And for me, it would have just been sitting in my closet. Now, that's a case where I actually committed to literally giving it to him right off the bat. But I've actually seen situations recently, like I know I run a piano tuning business, and one of my clients asked, hey, my mother has a Steinway piano. Can I have somebody babysit it for a while and just, that they'll take care of it until I need it, right? So there's all these situations where there's the potential to loan out an item. There's a potential to loan it out, and maybe with the option of actually buying it eventually if it turns out the original person didn't need it. So I think it's actually quite simple, right? Just to build some rules around this to help facilitate it.
I think it's timely also because, of course, this idea is not new in that people are exchanging goods and lending it out to each other. But technology is able to facilitate this in a way that has not existed before. It reminds me of the Buy Nothing project. Have you guys heard of that?
It sounds familiar. Tell us a little bit more about it.
The Buy Nothing project, it's a hyper-local gifting project that started in 2013 in Wales. And as of January of this year, they've had at least 1.2 million participants in 25 countries, over 6,000 volunteers. The way that it works is it's a gifting thing. So it's not as much lending and borrowing, but if you can find a local community. So I'm part of the Pittsburgh community, and they're mainly organized through Facebook groups. You go on there and you can either just post about something that you're looking for or something that you're looking to give away, no strings attached. Not allowed to sell anything on it, not allowed to be a jerk, all that kind of stuff normally applies, of course, but it's something that people feel good about this, all the reasons that we're talking about, the psychological benefits of, like Ethan had mentioned, of giving something away, just facilitated by technology. I think that you can take this, you can turn it into tweak it a little bit to make it more financially incentivized, which is what we're talking about here. And I think that's the direction people are going. People are thinking about everything from their home to their cars to tools as assets that they can, when they're just sitting there, that can produce a return for them. I know Tesla, I'm a big fan of Tesla. We talk about Tesla on the podcast a lot. They're looking to create a ride hailing network where once the cars are able to drive fully autonomously, rather than have it parked in your garage 95% of the time, it can go out there and pick people up and take people to different, wherever they're going, just like Uber, except without a driver being present. So I think that this idea taps into this broader problem of people have things that they're not using all the time. And on the other side, people need things temporarily that they don't, it's either wasteful or too expensive to buy.
Yeah, one thing that I'm thinking.
And I agree.
Go ahead, Ryan.
And I think there's as people like try new hobbies and want new experiences too. Like if somebody wants to, for instance, um, try mountain biking, but they don't want to try it with a cheap, sort of, ineffective mountain bike, but they also don't want to go spend 3 grand, right, on a decent mountain bike. But if they could borrow a mountain bike from somebody for a day or a weekend, right, then they could borrow it. They could save money through, the borrowing process, and they could really, have an experience with it and figure out, do I want to go mountain biking more, and should I buy one of my own, right? And so I think there's a hobby sort of experiential component to this too, where people are unsure of if they want to buy something to facilitate a new hobby or experience versus can they just borrow somebody's and sort of, get their feet wet, right, in a new experience or a new hobby.
So I'm thinking I'm wanting to dive in a little bit into how this actually works. One of the things that I'm thinking of is, any item has a retail value, right? So you could certainly look it up online, and maybe even an MSRP, just to make it very, very clear what the actual value of the item is, even though you might find it for cheaper or whatever. And then the system could create relatively simple rules around, what are the costs involved. For example, if the person doesn't get it back or they don't return it before a certain date or something like that, just say, 1% of the MSRP, will be billed every week or every day or whatever it is, while that item has not been returned. And, if you need to get more details, you could have each of the people involved in the transaction rate, the quality of the item. Is it good? Is it fair? Is it used? Is it like new? Things like that. And you might even be able to incorporate tracking of the item's issues, right? So, oh, we've got some past photos of this item that it shows that there's a dent in it, right? And so that if somebody borrows it and they give it back, we can say, okay, that was already there. Let's not worry about it. And then in terms of making money off of it, I'm thinking there could be a percentage of its value that's taken by the app, right? Whatever the MSRP is of that item, the app just charges a modest cut of what that is for the fact that it's being borrowed, possibly to the borrower and not to the person that's lending it out, just because it makes sense. Any other thoughts on how you might make income on this?
Thinking about making money on that. I think one of the key things here is you want to reduce friction so that you're not hurting the network effects that you need for this app to scale. So to me, if you were charging the borrower to use it, it's kind of icky. And borrowing and lending right now, at least, is in the social sphere. It's not a financial transaction if you're lending a neighbor a saw, right? And if you're asking someone to, hey, you can borrow this, but you got to enter your credit card details in the app in order to do so, I think that can introduce a little bit of friction that would keep people from doing it. Not that it's not surmountable, but but that's what's going on in my head of how do you do that. I was brainstorming a couple ways in which you could make money. One was percentage of late fees itself, uh, a small transaction fee for each borrow, similar to what you had mentioned, Ethan. Maybe a yearly subscription to be part of the network in itself. And then also affiliate sales of products that you can't find to borrow. Let's say you're looking for a saw in Pittsburgh and there aren't any available. You can have an ad in there that goes to Home Depot and you can buy one, and we would get a cut.
Now, what is there a danger in mixing sort of like rentals with borrowing in an app like this? And is it gonna, if I can lend things out sort of for free and only in exchange for late fees or something, do I start to just say, hey, why don't I just rent this then? And then it kind of eliminates the incentive for this kind of happy, we're all just trading and borrowing and enjoying each other's things kind of part of things. Would it ruin it if we also incorporated hey, you know what? Instead of being a lender, you could also be someone who rents equipment?
There might be a little bit of a delay in your feed, Ryan. But
I think he's just looking very stoic. I think the last point that I made
it's just so deep.
like,
No, that's fine. I think that it could, but I guess I also, maybe the capitalist in me is saying that that's a better way of doing it, and there will be more usage overall if people can look at the stuff that they have in their home and think of them as income generating potential, as opposed to signing up just out of the goodness of their heart. Now, I mean, maybe you could argue the other way, where people would sign up out of excitement for being able to get to use all these other things on the cheap. It reminds me of a service that you had shared with me, Ethan, called Trusted House Sitters.
oh
And
yeah,
I'm shocked that this service is not more popular. I've talked with many people who just have not heard about it at all. We use it all the time. We used to, before the pandemic, I'd say mostly, but basically you can list your house on the site for a very small yearly fee. I think it's maybe $130 a year compared to what you're getting. And people will they'll apply to take care of your pets, your plants, your home. Uh, it's a little bit different from the renting and borrowing, but it's still kind of this generous mantra. And I'm surprised at how many people are willing to stay in Leetsdale, Pennsylvania for a week. What do you want to do here? Why are you all applying to be here? Saves us
and
a
you
ton of
too
money.
can stay at Chris's home
Yeah,
while he's out of
exactly.
town.
You can look it up.
Yeah, but I actually
Yeah,
that's
well, I
actually
think
quite a similar idea.
jumped the shark.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, and I think we've jumped the shark on, peer-to-peer transactions, right? I mean, Airbnb, right, had just recently IPO'd, and nobody thought that people would want to rent rooms or rent other people's homes, right? Turo is out there where you can rent your car, right? And so I think that we've now societally, adopted, and we now understand that renting property and personal items is a new economy, right? And it's a new way to make money, but it's also a new way to save money. So I don't think that would necessarily be as big of an issue. I think, and I think it still would happen where two neighbors who, pass weed whackers back and forth, and who borrow lawnmowers when the others is in the shop, right? That stuff is still going to happen, right? Even if an app like this exists and there's this borrowing economy. I think this is really speaking to, you've got something of value that you're not really using consistently, and that it has value to others, and you could go out and then make it available to other people, right?
I was thinking about an idea like this a couple of weeks ago. Two of my good friends, they had a virtual reality company, and the way that they made the majority of their revenue was by doing events. And they would fly to Salt Lake City or Las Vegas or whatever, and they would end up having to purchase a bunch of TVs and all the equipment in order to set up their VR system. And then they ended up, on the way to the airport, they would literally give the taxi driver the TV, whatever, 32-inch TV, because it did not make sense for them to ship it all around. I was thinking to myself, I would lend my TV out for a week, or a weekend, pay me $100 or something. And sure, yeah, I don't need my TV during that time.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
there's
I think we've all got items like that, right? That in any, at any point in time, we would be willing to, let someone borrow something of ours that we weren't going to be using. And I don't know, I think there is a borrowing economy that's probably just ripe now, because we've crossed that threshold of it's okay to rent and to monetize personal property, where pre-Airbnb and those other companies, it was sort of taboo to do that, right? But now societally, I think it's widely accepted now that that's going to, not only is it going to happen, but it's going to happen at greater scale moving forward than it ever has.
So Ryan, you've been part of building several software and other service type companies. If you're thinking about how you would use that experience and start this idea, it seems straightforward from what we've talked about so far. But of course, there are going to be a bunch of challenges in doing that. Uh, Getting people to sign up jumps out as a challenge. Uh, Building it in itself, do you attach QR codes or something to the piece of item? How do you track all the items? It seems like there are a lot of problems that need to be figured out in order to get something like this going. What do you guys think where do you think it makes sense to start?
Yeah, I think that my fundamental assumption now, for clients of my product firm, AWH, and startups that I'm invested in and others that I advise, I think you have to have the base assumption that it can be built, right? Whatever you're talking about, right, can be designed and can be developed, and the technical challenges likely can be overcome. I think the challenges that are the hardest now, and you made this point, is distribution, right? How is anybody going to become aware of this new whiz bang thing that you've built, and how are you going to acquire users, and how are you going to acquire users cost effectively enough so that the business model works? That's what you really have to prove at the beginning, because if you make the assumption that the tech piece can and the product can get built, what you really got to validate is your distribution.
You know what? I just thought of an interesting idea to make this a hot, growing item. So oftentimes when you have startups that are trying to grow quickly, they offer these really extreme incentives for sort of joining the network, right? Like, you will get your commissions for life, 50% commissions for life for anybody that you bring on as another founding member of this app or whatever it is. And so you look at that and go, oh yeah, we gotta get this thing going. So around lending things out, everybody's got something or other around their house that's actually really cool and they never use, right? So you could capture people searching for, hey, can I buy this or can I buy that? And as a new user of it, the service can ask you, hey, what's your coolest thing that you'd like to say in order to help grow this project you'd like to offer to be lending out? And then in exchange, the service can say, well, we're going to fully insure it, for whatever. If it gets stolen, if it gets lost, if it gets broken, we're going to pay you back the full value, buy you a whole new item. But in the spirit of like doing exciting things to get this thing growing, what are you willing to put out to lend and make it exciting? Could be a cool kind of PR move to get started.
I'm wondering if there should be certain categories of items that you would start with, just because they would be most popular, and it could be something like TVs, the high value ones that really get people excited about taking part of it. I don't know how many people would want to borrow a TV for a weekend, but something like that. In terms of finding folks, one tool that comes to mind for me for my marketing work, there's this company called El Toro, and they do IP-based targeting. And you can draw a box. They map buildings down to the square meter on IP addresses. You can draw a box around, let's say, a toy exchange in Pittsburgh. From 10 to noon every Saturday, they have a toy exchange. You can draw a box around the building that it happens, and everyone who shows up in there, you can retarget. So some really interesting technologies like that. That wouldn't be the first place that I would go, but there are ways that I think the bigger idea is trying to find people who are already trying to do this in other areas like toy exchange, maybe the Buy Nothing project, maybe Toro, things like that.
Yeah, and there certainly are I think there's a franchise company in the sporting goods space called Play Against Sports, and they sell sporting goods on consignment. So if you don't play golf that much and you just want to pick up a pair of clubs, you can go in there and buy somebody's old pair of clubs. And I think that the retail component of exchanges and consignment stores is probably going to be impacted a little bit by the pandemic. People may be less willing to go into a consignment store or a thrift store and rifle through a bunch of stuff, versus being able to post somewhere that, hey, I'm looking for this item and I need it for a week. Does anybody have it that I can borrow it for a week, right? And so I think there's a shift in retail happening anyway. I think this potentially aligns with a shift in retail where people are going to be less willing to be in stores around a lot of other people and rifling through a bunch of stuff.
So I think that what you brought up earlier, Ryan, is and you just sort of called back to it. It's a great place to start, and that is with sort of recreational items, right? Like a TV is not a recreational item. It kind of sits in your house, right? But a mountain bike, right? Or a pair of skis, or like a snowboard, or even like a snow suit or something like that. If you just want to go hiking, or a tent, all these items that people might only use once or twice a year, but they keep in their garage, and it's maybe sports related. You actually might be able to have a sports theme, sports and outdoors and things like that, have that kind of theme. A lot of these items are seasonal too, right? So maybe it can be something where, someone in the South, can loan something out, ship it out to someone in the North when they need a tent, right? Because it's a different season and it's time to go camping in that area of the world. So I like that as a potential starting point.
Yeah,
there's some interesting. I'll give one example of an established business that seems to be doing quite well. I've been using it for years. It's called Gear Trade. So it's maybe similar to Play It Again Sports. People can list their sporting good items on this website, and you can find something super cheap, sometimes 10%, sometimes 90% less than you would to buy it new. And a lot of it is this kind of sporting goods, camping, stuff like that.
Yeah, and even national outdoor retailers like REI will do like garage sale days, where REI customers ahead of this garage sale day at an REI store can take in equipment that they are willing to sell on consignment, and REI supports it, typically on a special 1 or 2 days a year. The challenge with that is, if your item doesn't sell, now you've got to go back to the store to pick it up. So there's some logistics involved that can be inconvenient, versus this kind of a model where you can make your stuff available for people to borrow, and now you don't have to make a decision, because in these other situations that we're talking about, you have to make a sort of hold or fold decision, right? You either have to make a decision about, I'm going to take my tent to REI's garage sale day to see if they can sell it for me, versus I'm going to borrow it. I'm going to lend it to somebody who can borrow it, but I'm still going to get it back. So I don't have to make an ownership or non-ownership decision around this tent. I can let people borrow it when I'm not using it, but then I still have it for my own use, right, when I get it back.
So I'm going to just come in extreme, bad cop on this real quick. And just say that, isn't it just a myth that you can borrow something and it's like you're not using it? I mean, you're borrowing it. You borrow that mountain bike, you get it dirty, you get it dented, you get it messed up. So you're actually getting some usage out of it. You're taking away from the life of the item. And so for someone else to be willing to sort of do that process for free, it's kind of like it's kind of like believing that there's no conservation of energy in the universe. I mean, everything gets older when it's used. Another total objection I have is, oftentimes I find the people that view things as that they don't get used up when they get borrowed are the ones that abuse them the most. Especially like I've run into this with younger people, like maybe in their mid-20s. They're starting to get out into the world and start using things. They totally think they could just borrow everything like they used to borrow it from their parents. And then, all of a sudden they have lost it. or ruined it, and they don't even know
You've
what to do
officially
anymore.
become an old man, Ethan.
I am an old man.
These younger kids taking our stuff and ruining them.
These kids can't be trusted.
I do have a story. I have a very
good.
specific story. You know what? I'm going to tell the story.
Go for
And
it.
it's not out of resentment. It's out of hopefully just telling a story. But I've trained piano technicians, and I did at a point. I was still relatively young. I was in my late 20s, and some of these guys in their early mid 20s. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to loan out my piano tuning tools to them, and it's going to be great, and it's just going to be this wonderful giving thing. And I remember the guy that I loaned out these piano tuning tools to. It was time for me to go pick him up, and he was about to move his apartment. And I said, are you going to give me back those piano tools? He's like, oh, I already moved. It's with a bunch of stuff that I left in my room. You go ahead and pick it up. I literally went to his apartment, and the tools were scattered across the floor among like dirty laundry and like all these other, garbage, leftover items. And these are expensive tools. And, I had to go there and collect them, and I had to have like a second thought about, what does it mean to loan something out? How often would I actually do this? Is it something that you do with caveats, or you just stop doing altogether, And to this day, I'm much more cautious when I'm loaning things out. Unfortunately, it's kind of unfortunate, to be honest.
Yeah, no, and I get that, and I think that's the experience for a lot of people as part of lending things, right? And I think that's one of the reasons that the app and the platform can provide value, is because when you systematize something inside of an app and a platform, and people are going to be held accountable, right, based upon user reviews and their account thresholds of how many things they can borrow or the value of things they can borrow, I think the system accountability then encourages borrowers to behave better as borrowers.
Yeah, I love that.
That's a great point. So you can, maybe when you first sign up, you can only borrow something that's worth $10 or less until you get enough reviews to be able to move on to larger items, potentially. It is messy though. Let's say that someone does dent your mountain bike. How much value has been lost in that? An app is not going to be able to arbitrate that without a person intervening, right? Someone would be upset if they had to pay $2,000 for a mountain bike if for one dent. But yeah, I don't know how you handle that.
It'd be interesting to look up. I think probably one of the best examples already been raised. The car sharing app, Turo. I've rented with Turo a few times, and there's been little situations, not where, like one of them I got a ticket, and this was like another stupid story. I was in a national park with like a stop sign in the middle of it for no reason, and a camera tracking like whether I actually came to a full stop. But anyways, I got this ticket, and I kind of wanted to contest it because it seemed outlandish, and there were ways to negotiate this, basically. You know what I mean? They had built ways to make sure that this worked out. In the end, I just ended up paying the ticket because it wasn't worth giving the headache to the owner of the car around it. And I agreed that even though it probably wasn't a fair ticket, it was just worth it for the good of the app and the good of the ecosystem. So I think people will work things out among themselves, and an app like this will develop protocols to help make sure things move smoothly.
Yeah, and almost all of these peer-to-peer apps and companies now have some sort of arbitration mechanism built into the app and built into the policies and procedures. And so, if someone stays in an Airbnb and puts a hole in the drywall, right? There's a way for the homeowner to then seek compensation through Airbnb as part of that damage. And sometimes that flows down to the customer, right? The renter, and sometimes Airbnb just uses their own insurance, right? It depends on sort of the level of the damage. So yeah, I think there's a lot of that sort of peer-to-peer mediation arbitration has been addressed because peer-to-peer economy now is not new, right? And so there are things that are going to happen in situations where one consumer is letting another consumer use property under, the guise of a managed transaction through an app. So I think many of those things have been resolved from a system perspective. I think there's still the sort of emotional perspective of, hey, I really love my mountain bike, and I wouldn't want anybody to mistreat my baby, right? And so, as part of the process, we'd have to find a way to get people, especially lenders, comfortable with lending things that are of value to them, and maybe even sentimental value, knowing that somebody else may not treat that thing quite as well as they treat it.
Yeah, that makes me really drive toward this needs to be financially incentivized. It's my opinion, at least, because I can't imagine letting someone just borrow something for free of high value to me. Certainly not a car, like that doesn't happen, but probably not even a mountain bike or a TV to a stranger. I don't know. I mean, if I were compensated for it, I would do it, but
Yeah, and maybe there are, as we were talking about thresholds before of new users, how much they can borrow. Maybe there are thresholds around the financial aspects and fees. So if you're borrowing a $20 book, maybe there's no fee as part of that. But if you're borrowing a $3,000 mountain bike, there is a fee, just to process the actual borrowing activity.
So let's just dive into how lucrative of a business is this? Do we have a sense, is this like a $1 million business? Is this $1 billion business? And if so, if it is of the higher levels of zeros at the end of the first one, how do we get there? Where does the income come from?
I think it has massive potential, because if you look at, and it's easy to point to Airbnb because they just recently IPO'd, right? And say, well, if the value of peer-to-peer residential rentals, right, is valued at that, then what's the value of all sorts of other personal item rentals, right, besides residences? You'd have to think it would be pretty big. I think to get there and to fulfill that potential, I think it has to cross a chasm at some point of, and viral's overused, but I think that it's gotta be it's gotta capitalize on the sharing social economy, where the two of you hear about it because I say, hey, I just rented my mountain bike to some dude for a weekend, and I made $125, and the dude had a great experience and I had a great experience, and I know that you've got keyboards, right, that you could rent, right? I think it's, for it to reach that potential, I think it's got to be something that goes beyond sort of company driven marketing to community driven marketing and sharing.
This feels like it has to be a venture-backed business and not one that's bootstrapped. There are a lot of moving pieces. It seems like you need a lot of capital to get out in front of a lot of people at once and build the network effects. I'm curious, Ryan, I mean, you've seen a lot of businesses. Do you think that you could bootstrap this, or do you need venture capital?
I think it could be bootstrapped, but I think the better way would be to get some investment behind it. Because again, the technology piece and the product piece actually isn't the biggest problem. It's the marketing and distribution and awareness. And marketing and distribution are less expensive than they've historically been, because you can use the social platforms and target really precisely and fairly inexpensively. But you're still talking about a marketing spend probably of $20,000 a week, right, or something like that to start. So it would be, you could bootstrap it at the beginning to get enough validation to say, hey, we ran these social campaigns and we acquired this many users. Now, if we poured fuel on this and we ran this many campaigns, we would get this many users, right? I think you could do some early bootstrap validation, but I think if you're really going to scale it as quickly as you would want to, it's probably going to require some funding, because you're going to want to pour some fuel on the marketing distribution side.
I kind of like, there's two things I want to call out here. I kind of like the rentals being the focus of you as the business owner, business starter, and maybe the borrowing aspect of it almost kind of like a lead magnet to the platform. Maybe people who would rent things out might also, you know, kind of offer things for free for a limited amount of time just to kind of attract business. When I look at Airbnb specifically and I look at Turo, here's a couple of aspects that I'm thinking. Really what I've seen with Turo is the best experiences that I've had are people who they bought a bunch of cars and they've basically become their own little car rental service, you know, and I'll go pick up a car and they'll have like 10 cars parked outside their house. Um, and they've invested quite a bit, you know, in purchasing vehicles and so on and so forth to become a little rental facility. So that's probably going to be the direction that the power users are going to go. They're going to become little rental houses and actually build an income. So you're going to want to sell that to users as a possibility that they could make some income just by renting cool things. The other thing about the Airbnb aspect is you could, one thing that I think people love about Airbnb is this experience of doing something unique and interesting, at least, you know, for a week. We just did an Airbnb where we stayed on a farm for my son's birthday. He's 3 years old. You know, we got to feed the chickens, you know, we got to make a fire and we roasted marshmallows, and sort of all these things were part of why we wanted to do that. So I think another thing that you could sell to potential users is I'm not just borrowing this thing that you can borrow or buy anywhere. It's kind of like a cool version of it that somebody happens to have. And I'm willing to, or I guess in that aspect, I think rental, borrowing and then moving on to rentals. Can I rent you like this really tricked out mountain bike that I have that you might never buy for yourself, but it's going to be really fun to go for a ride and maybe have this, even have this experience where, you know, I have a whole route planned out for you or something like that.
Yeah, I totally agree that around these social, you know, sharing sort of peer-to-peer networks, that people end up building their own micro businesses inside of them, right? And I think that a really good example of that is I was at Zion National Park this summer, and I was with my 13-year-old son, and the place that we rented bikes from, when we got there the second day, they had run out of kids' bikes. And so they had a rental bike for me, but they did not have a bike for him. So we then took one of the full-size bikes, and we adjusted it so that my son could ride it. But we almost couldn't get our bike rentals that second day. Yet through a platform like this, there could be, you know, other individuals who just go out and buy 8 bikes, who then end up in their own little bike rental micro business when they want to do it, that would augment the 2 bike shops that are in the town close to Zion. They only have a limited amount of inventory.
Yeah, one thing I like about this as we're progressing with the idea is you're having this place where you can now sell dreams to people. And I think that's really what is selling a lot of, you know, especially Airbnb is a really great example. And so, and also experiences. Our economy is moving away from objects and people learning that experiences are more valuable than, you know, owning objects. And so there's this great dream that I'm imagining that you can sell to one of the sort of person that would become a regular vendor. It's like you can rent out all these really cool, you know, all this really cool camping equipment, and you could create these wonderful experiences for people that will rent it from you. And at the same time, if you want to take a weekend and now you've got all this like badass, you know, camping equipment and you want to go on a trip, you know, your whole business has funded that and facilitated the lifestyle that you want to have. I really like that aspect of it. And I think people would get pretty excited about that.
Well, we're coming up on time here. We can keep talking about this all day. Ryan, you got one more comment you wanted to add?
Yeah. To build on Ethan's last point, I can see where renters would put packages together for people too, right? So it might start out where they start renting a tent, and then it becomes they start renting a tent with then a grill and almost a whole camping set, sort of camping in a box. But then they also might say, okay, we'll also include, food for, a lunch and for dinner, right, etc. To where now you've literally got an experience in a box that they can rent out, and it becomes turnkey for the borrower, right? Or the renter on the other side of the equation. So I do think this would lend very well and would become very experiential, I think. And I think that it should.
Yeah, and I think, I know we're sort of short on time, but I think we're really digging into some really interesting stuff now. I think what we're seeing now is this, as we're building it now, it could be potentially be something that latches onto a system like Airbnb. Airbnb already is facilitating like these experiences, like you can go to a place and then you can purchase an experience, but maybe it's something where if you built it big enough, or sorry, if you built it the right way, not big enough, it could be something that people do as part of Airbnb experiences. And then maybe you're building a company that eventually gets acquired by Airbnb in the end. That seems like a much clearer route to profitability and having a long-term vision than just kind of, starting out just, hey, we want to help people borrow things.
Yeah, there are a bunch of ways that we can take this. Ryan's brilliant idea. Thank you for sharing this. It's been fun talking through it. Where can people go to learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah, the Founder's Manual, the book that we've referenced a couple times, is available at thefoundersmanual.com. And then my product firm, which I've also mentioned a couple times, is awh.net. And we help clients build digital products very much like the borrower one that we're speaking of. So if somebody's in the need of some digital product help, then reach out to us there, and the team will get back to them.
Great. Ryan, it's been a pleasure talking with you. For the person out there listening, take some action. Tell us what you think about this episode. Whatever your thoughts are, email us at update@runwithit.fm. You can also review us at Apple Podcasts and let us know what you think that way. We really appreciate hearing from you. And until next week, we will enjoy yourself. And I've got this in the back of my head. I see you stared at me, Ethan, because I said to the listener out there, I can't stop doing that. I'm sorry, listener, not out there, in here, in your earphones. But appreciate spending this time with you. It's been fun. We'll see you in 2021.
The funny thing is, I thought you got it right, because you said to you, and I was like, oh, you, yes, the very one person. And then I missed that you said out there. And then later I was like, oh, but yeah, he said out there.
He said it. It's still there. That's for the outtakes. One day I'll get that. Cool. All right. You want to sign us off on Facebook?
Yeah, that sounds good. Let's see here.
Okay. I stopped the recording. How'd you think it went, Ryan?
Yeah, good. I think